Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of the two final guest talks of the semester organized by the Center on Contemporary China and the World at the University of Hong Kong. I'm Li Chen, director of the center and a professor in the Department of Politics and Public Administration. Over the past semester, we have hosted more than a dozen events, probably 20 public lectures. Tomorrow afternoon, we will assess the latest developments and the challenges regarding the Belt Road Initiative, featuring Boston University professor Ian Ming. Today, let us delve into the discussion of China's rejuvenation, achievement, challenges, and the prospects. China is, as we know, is a prominent part of the global landscape, shaped by profound economic shifts and the geopolitical dynamics. The past year has witnessed nations grappling with the volatile markets, fluctuating trade policies, and the ripple effects of global supply chain disruptions. These challenges have underscored the interconnectedness of the economic worldwide, highlighting the critical role of a major economy like China in shaping the future course of global prosperity. Our discussion today promises to be a pivotal exploration into China's growth trajectory, its evolving role in the international arena, and Beijing's strategic path ahead. No one is more qualified to speak on this subject than our distinguished guest speaker this afternoon, Professor Justin Lin, Lin Yifu. Professor Lin has a legendary career. I don't want to repeat, probably many of you know his legendary career. And he brings a wealth of experience and expertise at the intersection of academic, think tank research, policy advising, and global economic, and also the global economic development. And he is a triple D. This is a term I created for you, and because he is currently serving as the Dean of the Institute of New Structure Economics, Dean of the Institute of South and South Cooperation and Development, and the Honorary Dean of the National School of Development at Peking University. Dr. Lin is known for his prominent role in shaping economic policies and strategies. As Senior Vice President and Chief Economist at the World Bank from 2008 and 2012, and Bob Zalik, I think that period, right? He is president. He was president then. Professor Lin's insights and predictions have proven far-sighted, earning him a reputation as a leading authority on economic trends, both in China and the world. Prior to this global role, Dr. Lin spent 15 years as the founding director and a professor at the China Center for Economic Research at the Peking University. This is really the hub of China's research during that period. You look at the list, it's a who's who. I wrote extensively on that period and Professor Lin's leadership. Dr. Lin's deep insights into economic dynamics are reflected in his extensive publications, which includes over 20 books covering topics from China's economic transformation to global development cooperation. As a member of the Standing Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CCCPC, Dr. Lin continues to advise on critical economic policies at the national level. As we anticipate the outcome of the upcoming third platinum in July, Dr. Lin's perspective holds particular significance, offering insights into potential pathways for China's future economic policies and their global ramifications. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin, for traveling all the way to Hong Kong and finding time in your extremely busy schedule to speak at Hong Kong U. Join Dr. Lin for the discussion following his opening remark. My colleague, Dr. Han Haiwai and Deng Shiwei in Chinese, and also Dr. Yuping Hai. Dr. Pan also brings a wealth of experience in international economics and trade dynamics to today's discussion. As the Victor and William Fong Professor in Economics, Director of the Asian Global Institute, and Associate Dean of the Business School at Hong Kong U, his research focuses on the intricate web of the global value chains and the production networks. Dr. Pan's insights have not only shaped economic discourse, but also informed policy decisions globally. Joining from his his consultant role with organizations like the World Bank, but also United Nations. His ability to navigate the complexities of international trade dynamics makes him an invaluable voice in today's exploration of China's economic transformation and also challenges. Dr. Yuping Hai, commonly known as the PHU, is a well-known figure in international relations and economic circles in China and beyond, bringing a unique perspective shaped by decades of academic and business involvements in China's market reform. Chairman of the Council of the Institute of New Structural Economics at the Peking University, and the founder of the Center for U.S.-China Relations at the Tsinghua University. Dr. Yu has fostered critical dialogues between nations, especially between United States and China. Once an owner of Huawei, I actually really miss Huawei and your leadership, it really covered a lot of news, and also the founder of Hong Kong Ling, very popular online magazine. Dr. Yu's deep-rooted understanding of China's historical transformation and his role in establishing influential research institutes and the media outlets highlight his commitment to public discourse of policy issues. Now, once again, thank you for joining us, all of you, but also particularly for our speaker and discussants. Please you join me to give a round of applause to our speaker and discussant today.
Thank you for such a nice introduction of myself, Dr. Li. Education to speak on a topic has been dear to my heart since I was a little boy. That is China's rejuvenation. As you know, after China was defeated at Opium War in 1840, rejuvenation of the nation has been a dream for the Chinese people, always. And this dream seems to be too far away. Not until reform and opening up started in 1978. And as you know, after the reform and opening up, the development in China is a miracle in the human history. The average annual growth rate in the past 45 years was 8.9%. We never observed such a high growth rate to be sustained for such a long time in any nation or in any period of time. And as a result of that rapid growth, the economic size in China expanded 47 times. And China now is the second largest economy in the world, measured by market exchange rate. And if we measure the economic size by purchasing power parity, China is the largest economy in the world. And China is also the largest trading country in the world. China is the #1 trading partners for more than 140 countries in the world. And the second largest trading partners for another 60 countries and so. And during this period of time, more than 800 million people were lifted from poverty, according to the UN World Bank standards. And now China's dream, China's goal, is to become a modern, advanced, strong country by the time of 2049, the centennial of the founding of the People's Republic. And in spite of these remarkable achievements, you can always hear all kinds of rhetorics. Chinese economy was going to collapse very soon. And every several years, you heard of those kind of analysis. Journalists like Economist, Wall Street Journal, and New York Times, and so on, Financial Times, and so on. And they give you all kind of very convincing evidence that China cannot sustain the growth. But the fact is that China is the only country in the past 45 years did not encounter a systematic crisis. All other major economies, they all encountered crises, but China did not. And so in my talk, I'd like to provide my understanding. How come it was possible for China to grow so fast after 1978? And certainly I also need to answer, how come China could not have a similar performance before 1978? Although the goal has been the same always. But how come before 1978, the performance in China was quite poor? And I also like to analyze, how come retrospectively growth with stability in China has been so outstanding? But how come so many people, including authority in economics and journalists, they always said China is going to collapse in spite of the high growth in the past. But China cannot sustain the growth. And by respected economists, how come they always predict China's growth cannot be sustained? And lastly, I'd like to provide my, forecast or my prediction whether China will be able to achieve the dream of becoming a modern, advanced, strong country by the time of 2049. For the first question, it was possible for China to grow so fast for so long. We need to understand the nature of economic growth is continuous technological innovation and industrial upgrading. And after industrial revolution, the new technology as well as new industries have been driven the economic growth in the old industrial power. Certainly, China, if China wants to achieve similar growth, China would have to have continuous technological innovation and industrial upgrading. This nature of growth is the same for any country, no matter they are an advanced country or they are a developing country. The drivers, the mechanism are the same, but they're one thing different. That is, the old industrial powers, after the Industrial Revolution, they have always been the advanced country. And as they always have the highest income, highest productivity in the world, and that made them to be so powerful. And since they already have such a high productivity, that means what? They already use the best technology. They already produce in the highest value-added industries. And for them, if they want to have a technological innovation or industrial upgrading, they would have to invent the new technology and invent the new industries by themselves. And without invention, require huge investment and also very risky. And by the invention for new technology, invention for new industries, the advanced country in the past 100 and more years, on average, their per capita GDP growth rate was 2%. This has been very stable since the mid-19th century. For all the industrial power, like UK, like Germany, like France, or like US, this has been very stable, around 2%. As population growth, their average annual growth rate was around 3%. And for developing country like China, there's a better way for technology, innovation, and industrial upgrading. Because for a developing country like China, our income level is low. That means our technology was not so advanced. And our value added to our industry was not so high. And the so-called technological innovation means in the next period of time, you use some technology better than the technology you use now. So-called industrial upgrading, that means you go to industry, which have higher value added than the value added of the industry you are producing now. And as as a low-income country, China has a technological gap, industrial gap with the other one country. So China could learn, China could import, China could license the better technology. It's a way for the technological innovation and industrial upgrading. This seems to be so simple. And according to the Growth Commission, headed by Nobel Prize laureates Michael Spence and Robert Solow, after the Second World War, there are 13 developing economies find a way to tap into this potential called the latecomers advantages. They achieved 7% or more growth rate continuously for 25 or more years. As I mentioned, for the income country, their growth rate was around 2%. And if you can achieve 7% or more, that means your growth rate was double, triple of the advanced country. And certainly, you can rapidly narrow the gap with the advanced country. And luckily, China became one of those 13 economies after 1978. China started to tap into the potential of latecomers' advantages. And in a way, Hong Kong business community helped a lot. They relocate labor-intensive industry to China. Those are mature industry, but it was better than the industry in China. And those brought better technology than the technology used in China, and help China to have a technological industrial ability. So my answer to the first question should be simple. Rely on the latecomer advantage to drive technological innovation and industrial ability. And the answer to the first question should be so simple, then become a puzzle. How come before 1978, China did not benefit from these latecomers' advantages? Because after the Industrial Revolution in the West, China has been lagging behind for more than 2 centuries. And the gap, the latecomer advantage has been there. And how come China did not benefit from that? Because if you look in 1978, the per capita GDP in China, according to the World Bank, was 156 US dollars. And for the average per capita GDP of sub-Saharan African country, in 1978, their per capita GDP was 495 US dollars. China was one of the poorest countries. China's per capita GDP was less than 1/3 of the average in the sub-Saharan African country. The potential has been there. And how come China did not benefit from that? My answer was also simple. China intentionally or voluntarily gave up the latecomers' advantages. Because as I mentioned, national rejuvenation has been the dream for every generation of people in China. So when the People Republic was founded, certainly China wanted to have a national rejuvenation immediately. And how to have the national rejuvenation? China wanted to be an advanced country immediately. So China look at, if we want to be an advanced country, we should have similar level of productivities in order to have a similar level of income. Now, how to have a level of productivity as in the advanced country? At that time, we all concentrate their productions in the capital-intensive, large-scale industries. And so, for China's modernization, for China's catching up the advanced country to realize national dream. So after 1949, Chinese government adopted a strategy called the heavy industry oriented development strategies. Since those kind of heavy industries was the dominant industries in the Hong Kong country, and they were either protected by Peking or for national security reason, the advanced country were not willingly to transfer this kind of technology to China. And so if China wanted to develop those kind of industry, China would have to reinvent the wheel. If China reinvent the wheel, that means China gave up the possibility of importing, absorbing as a way for the innovations. So China gave up the potential of latecomers' advantages. Not only China gave up the potential of economic advantages. Because those kind of industries were so capital intensive. At that time, China was one of the poorest agrarian economy. Capital was extremely scarce. China had advantages in those kind of industries. And those kind of industry, since they were not consistent with the competitive advantage of Chinese economies and firms, industries were not viable. So the government had to get the firms in the priority industries, all kind of protections, subsidies, and also protection subsidies, using all kind of restrictions, all kinds of government interventions. As a result, China not only gave up the economic advantages, China also encountered all kinds of restrictions, misallocation of resources, and market failures. And so the economic performance was extremely poor. And people can raise their income, raise their living standards. China did not change these strategies until 1978. After 1978, China became more pragmatic, more realistic, started to facilitate the growth of labor-intensive industries, which were consistent with the abundant supply of labor in China. Those are China's competitive advantages. And so since they were consistent with China's competitive advantages, the cost of production will be very low. And with the government facilitation, attracting foreign direct investment to come, build up industrial park special economic zone to allow those firms to have a very good infrastructure. And within the industrial park with special economic zone, they make the business environment so attractive because basically it's one-stop services. And as a result, those kind of labor-intensive industries grew so rapidly. And when the exchange rapidly, so China accumulated capital. And China changed the environment structure largely from labor abundant to more capital abundant. And with that, certain China needs to have industrial upgrading. China also needs to use more capital-intensive industry technology to replace those labor-intensive technology, move up to more capital-intensive industry, and so on. And in this process is a step by step. China could utilize the latent advantages, the benefit, the mature technology, mature industries from the advanced country. And so the answer seems to be so simple, but how come there's always a prediction about coming collapse of the Chinese economy? I'm sure you heard a lot of that. And recently you hear the same rhetoric again. How come? I think the main reason China was not the only country to follow this development strategy after the founding of People's Republic in 1949. As you know, after the Industrial Revolution, the oil industrial power much faster. And the rest of the world became like behind. And so the country in Africa, the country in South Asia, in Central Asia, they became colonies of the industrial powers. And those colonies, they gained political independence after the Second World War. And they struggle, they sacrifice for that independent. And once they gain the political dependent, we have symmetry like China, wanted to catch up the advanced country. Those cannot have power, cannot have both immediately. So after the Second World War, all the social countries with the same mentality adopted similar heavy industry oriented development strategies. Other developing countries like India, they also call their strategies heavy industry oriented. Egypt also call their strategy heavy industry oriented. And a country in Latin America and in other parts of the world, often they said import substitution strategies. But so-called import substitution actually similar to the heavy industry oriented development strategy. Because we know most developing countries, their competitive advantage were either in natural resources or in the labor-intensive sectors. We used to export those kind of products. Now they wanted to produce similar advanced industrial product by themselves, and that will reduce the import. And so they call import substitution strategies. And this strategy all encountered similar troubles as China encountered before 1978. With the government facilitation, with the government mobilizations, we were able to build up those kind of modern industries, but they went against their competitive advantages. Firms in those kind of sectors were not viable. And they all rely on government production subsidies. And the government production subsidies always cause all kinds of distortion and a misallocation of resources and so on. So the economic performance were all very poor. And economies stagnant, and they were hit by crises all the time. So when China started the transition from the old strategy to market-oriented strategies, all the development were in socialist, were non-socialist. They all started their transition. And when they started transition, the ideas about the transition is that, well, most kind of government-led growth was not as efficient as market-oriented growth. And if we want to have a market system to replace heavily government-regulated system, allow market to work, you need to set up basic market institutions. And that is the so-called rational consensus. We need to allow all the prices to be determined by market, the so-called marketization. And if we want to make the firm to be response to price signals, then the firm need to be owned by the people. That is privatization. And the government role is to maintain market stability. And so the so-called stabilization, the government should not have a deficit. The government's role is to maintain macro stability. And the way to maintain macro stability is to have budget discipline. So that's so-called stabilization. And those are considered as three pillars for the operation of modern market. And almost all the country, almost all the economists, they provide similar analysis. Example, Madison in 1992, he was the chief economist of the World Bank. And he wrote one article. He said, in the past, we often have a joke to economists. If you raise a question to 5 economists, they will give you 6 answers. And each answer seems to be so conventional. So no one can convince the other to accept their answers. But he said, regarding the transition, this time surprisingly, there's a consensus in the economic community. That is to follow at that time called the Washington Consensus. Marketization, privatization, and stabilization. And China did not follow that. And you know, China adopted a gradual piecemeal. China continued to provide subsidies and protections to the old industries. But China has entry to the new industries. And China, all the new old industry, kept owned by the state. But the new entry mostly are by private. At that time, also there's a consensus. They said, this was the worst possible institutions you can have. And there's a QJ article to prove that. To say this will make the Chinese economy even worse than before 1978. Very convention. They were moderate and so on. And so, China's growth was a fact. But they say the approach in China was the worst possible. Was not sustainable. So whenever the growth rate in China dropped, I say 45 years on the average 8.9%, 8.9% does not mean every year 8.9, right? Sometimes it can be 10, 11, 12. Sometimes it can be lower than 8 or 7. When China grew at 10, 11, certainly it's a fact there. No one will accuse Chinese economy is going to collapse. As well as China growth dropped below the average, people start to say, hey, I know yours are not sustainable. Well, you see, the growth now decelerated, and you are going to collapse. And they can give you all kind of evidence how come Chinese growth cannot be sustained. Because they did not have those desirable market institution privatization that allow the market to play its determinant role in resource allocation, in price setting, and so on. And they said, how could your government be smarter than market? And so they said China was bound for collapse. And they gave you all kind of theoretical explanation. And those theory has been so convincing because when you study economics, you don't read. And that's the reason why whenever growth in China, China's growth is not sustainable. But the funny thing is that most countries follow the ideas, rational consensus, right strategies for transition. When economies all collapse. And they were hit by crisis all the times. Because in fact, growth following those rational consensus, those countries, the average annual growth rate was lower than the annual growth rate before the transition. If we compare those countries' growth in 1960 to 1970s with the growth in the transition in 1980s, 1990s. The growth before the transition was higher on the average. And also, the frequencies of the prices was even higher after the transition started in the 1980s. So those countries follow the so-called right approach. The economy collapsed. And those countries like China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and one country actually even earlier than China was Mauritius. In 1971, we started to transit from the import substitution strategies to more market-oriented strategies. All these well-performing transition economies, they all adopted similar strategies like China. Continue to provide subsidies and protection to all sectors, but liberalize the entry to the new sectors, and also facilitate the growth of the new sectors. For example, they all set up export purchasing zone and to provide good enough infrastructure to the new industry and so on. That's common. But this strategy at that time was considered as the worst possible strategy. And it's so conventional. Say, if you follow these strategies, your performance will be even poorer than before. But now they were actually better. And how come that was the case? I think the main reason, as I mentioned, the firms in those kind of older priority sectors were not viable because they went against their competitive advantages. And their production costs would be too high. They're not competitive at all. And if you are not providing protection and subsidies, they're going to what? Right? And not only so, some of those industries, you cannot allow them to go bankrupt. For example, power sectors, telecommunication sectors, you need to have them. And after the privatization, those kind of owners utilize the monopoly position to become oligarch and they control the politics to protect them. So as a result, the economic performance was even worse. And also the ideology was that the government should not support any specific industry. The government should not have an industrial policy. At the most, you can improve the business environment to benefit all the industries. You cannot have a policy to target new industries. But actually, every industries, the market failures they encounter will be somewhat different. If the government would not give help to overcome those kind of market failures, entrepreneurs by themselves will be very hard to overcome. And since the rational consensus at that time was a neoliberalism, the government should be the limited government. The government only function is to provide national defense, education, social stability, law and order. The government should not have an industrial policy. And so, for those countries follow the rational consensus, the oil industry collapsed. And they, encounter some industry being controlled by oligarchs. At the same time, they do not have the new industry to emerge. And as a result, their performance was even poorer. Then how come China could maintain stability and dynamic growth? And in fact, now China is very close to a market economy because the pragmatic approach, maintaining the continuous subsidy and protection to the oil industries so they can be stable, right? At the same time, facilitate the entry to the industries, which are consistent with China's competitive advantages. And by setting up special economic zone, industrial park, by active attracting foreign direct investment to those kind of sectors. They can grow very fast. They create jobs. They accumulate capitals. They can upgrade their industry. At the same time, gradually, China turned from a capital skills economy to relatively capital abundant economy. So many of those old industries in the past, they went against China's competitive advantages. So they require protection and subsidies. But now, with the accumulation of capitals, we became consistent with China's competitive advantages. So there's no need for protection and subsidies. Since there's no need for protection and subsidies, China can remove the protection and subsidies. And so that's the reason why China now is almost like a well-functioning market economy. Then the question, will China realize the dream or become an advanced, modern, strong country by the time of 1949? For this, we need to define what we mean by modern, advanced country. I started to pay attention to this issue in 2019 because that was the time Chinese government used this phrase. And in 2019, there were 70 countries that reached the status of high income. At that time, the threshold of high income was 12,500. There are 70 countries. Among the 70 countries, there were 28 where per capita GDP reached 50% or more of the US. And those 28 countries included all the oil industrial power, plus, Korea, Singapore, and Israel. So those are the all impression of advanced, powerful country, right? Certainly, those 28 also include a few oil rich country. And one or two, like Monaco, or those rely on gambling or financial centers, small, tiny country. But anyway, those are our impression of the advanced country. And further, China will be able to, by the time, reach 50% of the US by 2049. And in 2019, China's per capita GDP, measured by purchasing power parity, was 22.6% of the US. And if China wanted to reach 50% of the US, then it's about the annual per capita GDP growth rate in China should be 2.7%, higher than the US per capita GDP growth rate. And US per capita GDP growth rate in the past 60, 70 years, on the average was 1.8%. So that means in this 30 years time span, the per capita GDP growth rate in China should reach every year, on the average, 4.5%. And I mentioned in 2019, I used per capita GDP measured by purchasing power parity. But if China, by the time of 2049, reach 50% of US per capita GDP, at that time, the purchasing power parity and the market exchange rate measurement will be almost the same. Okay. Then the question is that whether China is possible to reach 4.5% continuously for the coming, now 25 years, and that time 30 years. And again, my answer is always very simple. Look into the nature of the growth and also the potential of the growth. For China, in 2019, per capita GDP to reach 22.6% of the US. It was similar to Germany in 1946, Japan in 1956, and Japan 1956, and Korea in 1985. And these three economies, for Germany, from 1946 to 1962, in those 16 years, the average annual growth rate was 9.4% per year. And their population growth rate was 0.8%. So that means per capita GDP growth rate was 8.6%. And for Japan, from 1956 to 1972, for those 16 years, the average annual growth rate was 9.6%, and the population growth rate was 1%. I think I have a few minutes from Dr. Yu. Yeah. Okay. No. Yeah, I think because the prospect is so important. Okay. And for Korea, from 1985 to 2001, those 16 years, the annual growth rate was 9%, and the population growth rate was 0.9%. So their average per capita GDP growth rate was 8.1%. So from the successful country to tap into the potential they come advantages, their per capita GDP growth rate can reach 8% or more. That means there's a potential for China to have a similar achievement. And compared to Germany and Japan and Korea, there's one advantage China has now, and they did not have at that time. That was the fourth industrial revolution in the digitalization, artificial intelligence, and so on. And for this, China's still on the same starting line, right, with other advanced countries. And compared to other advanced countries, China has three very important advantages. China has 1.4 billion population. China has a lot of talents. And China also has a very well-functioning STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. Each year, more than 7 million graduate in STEM, more than the combination of Europe, US, Japan, Korea. So they give China an advantage in talent pool. Secondly, China has a large unified domestic market. So any new technology, once breakthrough, they can immediately apply to the largest market to make them very competitive. Third, that if this new idea, new technology need to have hardware, China has the best ecosystem of hardware. So if they want to turn idea into product in China, the time required, the cost required will be the lowest. And so this also demonstrates, for example, for the software, now the most downloaded software in the US are all Chinese. And for those industry require hardware like Tesla. In the US, it developed more than 10 years. The most Tesla could produce was less than 30,000, right? And so Tesla was almost bankrupt. When he came to China for rescue, he invested in Shanghai in 2019. And next year, Tesla produced 480,000 cars. That Tesla now become the most valuable automakers in the world with a market cap of 600 billion. compared to, let's, like a General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, their market cap was only 40, 50 billion, right? So this demonstrated in this new economy, China have a much better opportunity. So from this, I'm confident up to 2035, there's a growth potential for China annually at 8%. But it's only a potential, right? China certainly need to cope with the geopolitical tension. China also need to deliver its promise of global warming to green the economy. China also need to, improve the domestic income distribution. China need to take care of aging population now. So all of this, I'm sure before 2035, it should be possible for China to grow at 5 to 6% on the average. And use similar analysis from 2036 to 2049. I think China has a growth potential of 6%. And again, China should be able to grow at 3 to 4%. And if China realize my prediction, by the time of 2049, China's per capita GDP will be 50% of the US. China will be considered as one of the modern advanced countries. And certainly, during this process, annually China will contribute, at least 30% to the global growth, and it will benefit everyone in the world. Thank you.
First of all, it's my great honor to be a discussant from Professor Lin's wonderful presentation about the past and the future of the Chinese economy. So let me say a few things about Professor Lin. He's a legend, as we all know. I remember when I was an undergraduate student in the 90s, I read one of your famous papers about the early reform of the Chinese economy. The paper published in 1992 in American Economic Review. The meaning of the Chinese economic reform and of fast growth for the last 4 decades, as described by Professor Lin just now, started in the revenue area when China or the Chinese government began the reform with decommoditization, right? Essentially allowing farmers to sell some of the produces to make a little bit of money, and therefore the market started to develop. Individuals started to view incentives, to have incentives to work harder because they can enjoy a little bit of the private benefit. Fast forward to today, Professor Li, despite his status as one of the advisors for the Chinese government, former chief economist of the World Bank, to be a very generous and I would say humble economist. Oftentimes when I send him emails, he will reply. Although usually the reply is, Professor Tang, thank you for the invitation. I have a very packed and busy schedule. I cannot come to Hong Kong University to give a talk. But then, you took Dr. Yu, I call him Yu Liang, right? Boss Yu, because he owns and founded Hong Kong 01, to invite Professor Lin to come to Hong Kong, and this is a wonderful opportunity, and I know how difficult it is to get Professor Lin to give a speech and talk. So I will waste 2 minutes of my time, and let me spend just 4 minutes, Professor Chang, if I can, about what I think about the challenges that the Chinese economy is facing. I agree totally with Professor Lin's description about how China made it, how China did it to deliver over 8% GDP growth per year in the last 4 decades. It involves economic reforms, trade liberalization, privatization of companies, a better balance between the state and the private sector. Right? So all this were all well understood if you have taken a class about the Chinese economy. I also agree that, when small open economies reach a certain level of economic development, they will not just rely on export growth. All of you know that Hong Kong is one of the four East Asian tigers, together with Taiwan, Singapore, and Korea. All of them managed to grow at a rate of 7% for more than 3 decades, thanks to exports and thanks to very collaborative and peaceful geopolitical environment. China grew at a rate of 6 or 7%. I agree with Professor Lin. There's a potential for them to do it, but it's very hard. First of all, China is not a small open economy, it's a big country. So it cannot rely on just exports, like what Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong did in the 70s and 80s. In addition to that, China is considered a threat to the largest economy in the world today, which is the United States. So there are a lot of geopolitical tension that doesn't require me to explain to you how those sanctions and export controls and trade war tariffs have been slowing down China's economic growth. So the question is, how can China overcome these limitations due to its sheer size, due to the limitation of export-led growth? Well, I guess the benefit of China is it has a huge market, as Professor Lin just described. But why, given the large market, China could not be less export dependent and more domestically driven for its economic growth? I guess we need to look at the structure of the Chinese economy. What is the share of consumption in China's GDP? 39%. One of the lowest consumption share in GDP in the world. And the question is, why consumption share is so low? Well, you can say because Chinese people love to save. But why do they want to save so much? Because they feel uncertain about the future. And why do they feel so uncertain about the future? Well, because they are worried about aging and the benefits and also cost. For Asian economies is that people live too young. So therefore they save and save, expecting that they will live beyond 100 years. And why do they want to save so much if they expect to live for so long? Because perhaps some safety net or some basic public health provision have not been fully developed. So my PhD advisor, Olivier Blanchard, who was the chief economist of the IMF at the same time when Professor Lin was the chief economist for the World Bank, has written a paper 2 decades ago, how to rebalance the Chinese economy. And this is what everyone has been talking about for the last 2 decades, how to rebalance the Chinese economy. Professor Blanchard has already mentioned 2 years ago, China or the Chinese government needed to do 3 things. First is to improve the quality and the accessibility of the public health to Chinese citizens, so that they feel that they have to save for high medical costs, they can just go to visit a doctor and pay a very low fee, including those people in the rural area. The second is how to make the Chinese economy to be less export dependent and more domestically driven, to make the RMB stronger. That's what they did 20 years ago. I'm not sure whether that is still correct for today, but that's their suggestion. The third one is to provide for low-income people to make money, because in China, as we all know, there's still a big rural income gap. So these are the 3 things that I think the Chinese government can think about in order to increase consumption share in China's GDP, so that China can be more dependent on its large domestic economy and less on export. So my final point is about industrial policy. I have a lot of friends who used to work for Professor Lin in the World Bank, and they told me, Professor Lin doesn't sleep that much. I don't know whether this should be reviewed. How many hours do you need to sleep per night? Probably less than 9. And the secret is that Professor Lin is a Tai Chi master. And what is Tai Chi? Tai Chi is all about balance, right? How to have yin and yang, and to have a balance and harmony in our bodies, in the system. So a lot of the Western economists got it wrong about the Chinese economy, in my opinion. They thought industrial policies are all about subsidizing industries, and therefore they are distorting the market, creating misallocation of resources. But if you think about the Chinese economy, they have been constantly trying to strike a balance between some government intervention and maximizing market economic power. I don't think the Chinese government is giving up that. They're still trying to find a balance. And interestingly, when the previous administration in the US under Donald Trump has been criticizing China's industrial policy, now the US government is the one that is implementing a lot of new industrial policy, which is not based on economic efficiency or growth. There's a good friend and co-author, Daniel Roderick. Daniel Roderick is one of my favorite economists in the US because he's the first person in the US who dares to say that industrial policy actually can help advanced economies to continue to progress, to potentially create some good jobs and make the economy more inclusive. So to say that the Chinese economy is off balance, we can also say that a lot of the advanced economies are off balance. Before, they strongly believe in neoliberalism or rational consensus, like Hong Kong, and therefore we started to have a lot of issues. Remember when people in the 80s in the US talk about neoliberalism, we emphasized the power of the market, which is about market competition. The problem is, if you allow the markets to be free for too long, you started to have a lot of monopolies. Monopolies are good at protecting the interests, they do a lobbying for policies, and in the end, the market is not going to be effective and it's not going to be free. So this is a question for all of us to think about, what is the right balance between the state and the private sector. And when I came back from the US to Hong Kong in 2019, Dr. Yu actually gave me a call and asked me to have a long conversation. I remember it's more than 2 hours to talk about, the kind of research I'm doing. And since then, she has been using the platform HK01 to Honorary, unfortunately, as one of the leftist economists in town. And I was just joking with Dr. Yu just now, it's not too hard to be a leftist economist in Hong Kong, because most of the famous economists in Hong Kong graduated from University of Chicago, like Professor Lin. And it doesn't mean that, you used to be a believer in macroeconomy, and now you cannot change. And I think Professor Lin has been updating himself, seeing, how the world has become a different world in the last many years. In the US, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, started redefining Washington Consensus by introducing something called the New Washington Consensus. And what's the New Washington Consensus? It's just a 180-degree opposite of the original Washington Consensus that was introduced by Peterson Institute economists. Let me stop here because I want to give some time to Dr. Yu, and then obviously you guys will have a lot of questions for Professor Lee. Thank you very much.
Seven, 8 years. And every time when we speak with him together, I always have to, I always try to, however, explain a little bit, okay, why he's so optimistic. Because almost every time when we work with him together, I'm always working with him following university or think tank. Everybody questions, okay, why is Nelson in recent bookings? And why is he so optimistic? But the problem is whether he's optimistic or pessimistic. The problem is why he's always right for the last 30, 40 years. It is easy for someone that is a practitioner in China business and economics that it's easy when we are there. We can feel the optimism, the positive trend that's going on. Let me continue with what Dr. Tang has just talked about, industrial policy. There's two things I like to comment on that, because in the last, before COVID, President hosted the Columbia University Dialogue every year. with Columbia University. I think in the 4 years we worked together, the theme is always state and market. And the theme by Professor Lin and me and a lot of the professors in Peking University is industrial policy is always the key issue that the Columbia University, including Larry Summers, including Jack Liu, they always, criticize China's industrial policy. And luckily, we have not met with our counterpart in the US for 4 years something. And then just like Mr. Tang just said, industrial policy is becoming the norm in the US. So let's stop debating state and markets. Stop debating the pros and cons of industrial policy. Let's really talk about why is it so successful for China. Because you just don't adopt industrial policy and think you will be successful, because there's a lot more detail in it. The second part of industrial policy, I remember about a year or so ago, I saw Farid Zakaria on his program on GPS. He was talking to Eric Smith, who was the head of the Innovative Council for President Biden. When they were talking, Farid Zakaria was asking Eric Smith, who was also the chairman of Google, he was asking him, why is the Inflation Reduction Act and all that, and CHIPS Act and all that, are they industrial policy? And then Eric Smith was basically evading the question and talk about many other things. And then when Farid Zakaria asked him again, is it? And he just smiled. Yeah, it possibly is. So what I'm telling you is that what China has been doing in the last 40, 45 years, it is a very unique form of industrial policy. But a lot of people only put it in the framework of the traditional understanding of industrial policy by doing a lot of subsidies, a lot of government-involved planning. But the China form of industrial policy is actually very different. And then let me come back to what Professor Lee was talking just now. Like I said, he doesn't speak that negatively about China at all. I don't want to use the word negative, but use the word challenges. He doesn't really speak that much because he's more optimistic than most other people. But there is truly a big challenge in my last 10, 12 years involvement between China and the USA and all of this economic and geopolitical dialogue. There's a big challenge, which is nobody understands what China is doing. So when we talk about industrial policy, they talk about that industrial policy instead of China's industrial policy. So when we talk about the Communist Party, they talk about the Soviet Union's Communist Party. They don't understand the Chinese Communist Party. When we talk about market, they only understand the Washington Consensus definition of market. They don't understand what China's way of talking about market, because they ignore anything like the China characteristic, okay, or China specialized form of market economy or socialist form of market economy. They don't. They just take the word from the way they understand it from their dictionary. They don't try to really understand it. What does it mean from the China perspective, or the way they grow the economy in the last 45 years? When we have that, when we start questioning, recently, the most popular item on the economic agenda is the new productive force. Okay, 3 days ago, our Legislative Council and also our Chief Executive have a pretty big forum talk about new productive force, 新知生产力. But the term productive force, I think those who are from China, the mainland China, they easily understand productive force. It's pretty frequently mentioned in China. But is that economic terms? Honestly, I don't think so. From the Western economic perspective, they don't have such term. But for those in China, they can easily understand what is productive. So when we hear real productive force or quality productive force, for the rest, they really, well, on the one hand, they laugh at it because they don't see that as economic terms. For those that are sympathetic to what China's been doing in the last 45 years, they start to think about it. But most of them don't really understand it. Just like a few days ago, the Legislative Council in Hong Kong debated on that or discussed about that. There's not really that much. They only think about it as, oh, it's technology, okay? It's robotic, it's AI. But it's a lot more than that. It actually does not time for Professor Lin to talk about that today, because we will talk about something like that this morning. Actually, he has a very good comprehensive perspective on that. Now, a productive force is not the term that you usually understand in economics. Your economic 101 or your doctoral thesis, it would be very difficult to explain what is productive force. How the hell can you understand the total strategy of China today to transform its economy to the next level? You can't. So we already talk about, oh, that's AI, oh, that's data. And then about, I think 2 years ago, the Chinese Communist Party put data as a factor of production in a formal paper. And the last, I'm sure most of us understand factor of production, 生产要素, in the Chinese way of talking about economics. In the West, I'm sure only Marxist economy class will talk about that. So why China so specifically put data as a factor of production added on top of land, capital, labor? Why? So the West doesn't understand that. There's no way you can understand what they're doing now. So I remember, I always repeated that, is I think it's 2006 or 2007. Alan Greenspan has a book after he retired. He talked about his conversation with Li Peng, way back, I think, in the mid-90s, okay, on what China is doing. So, and the conclusion that Alan Greenspan was speaking at that time is that China is a capitalist society. It's turned capitalism already. Why they still pretend they are run by Communist Party or running a socialist economy? So this is a big misunderstanding. I think the biggest challenge that China has on its rejuvenation is that it really needs to talk to the West, to talk to the economic action, what China's development means. Okay. Or by development, I'm sure one thing, in the Chinese, we talk a lot about development, 发展. But in the West, development is not really a term like economics, okay? Because development is a lot more than economics. We talk about like productive force. I'm sure productive force has a lot of social implications. It's a sociology theory at the same time as economic theory. So I think the biggest challenge China has in this rejuvenation is that let everybody understand what its intention is and why he does it. Okay? And if we don't talk that much and we don't understand each other well enough, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be misunderstanding. And when China keeps talking, like Professor Lin was talking, 50% of the per capita GDP of USA, we're not competing with USA. And we are just always, the Chinese always like to use a benchmark. Okay. So what we do at that, for example, in car, we don't use the American to be a benchmark. We use Toyota. We use GM. We use Volkswagen. We use recently we use Tesla. Okay. So I think when we go the Chinese rejuvenation, if we cannot communicate better with the rest of the world, I think that is the biggest challenge. Any misunderstanding will encourage conflict, at least misunderstanding, and then conflict. And more than that, it will be war. So I would say if there is any challenge, this is the key part of it. So I like to end it that way.
So, I'm asking to be the moderator. I think we have like 2 minutes left. I do have some questions for Professor Lin, but I want to see whether the audience have questions first because time is short. So I
Go to the floor.
yeah, let's go directly.
Respond to your comments first.
You can respond to my comments first. Okay, sure.
The first one, you mentioned China was an export-oriented economy. And I think it was a perception of China. But actually, if you look into, export as a percentage of GDP in China, the highest was 2006. At that time, export consisted of 35.4% of China's GDP, and now dropped down to about 15%. So actually, export was a very small portion of China's GDP. That's one thing. And then secondly, although people refer China as an export-oriented country, but in fact, export and import growth rate was almost similar. Export might be 1% higher than import, but they go parallel. So China not only export, China also import. China also allow other countries to benefit the growth of China. So to refer China as an export-oriented country, I think it's not an accurate, description of China's economic models. Secondly, many people say, consumption as a percentage of GDP in China was low, saving in China was high. That's a fact. You talk to the common people, except for economists, they do not care about consumption as a percentage of the GDP. They care about the growth of consumption every year. And the growth of consumption every year in China has been one of the highest in the world in the past 45 years. On the average, about 8% per year. You cannot find such high consumption growth in any other country. So only economists worry about the consumption as a percentage of GDP, and always say China has trouble because your consumption growth rate and consumption as a percentage of GDP has been too low. But who cares for the Chinese people? The Chinese also only care about my growth of consumption, right? And then secondly, China's consumption or saving was too high, but only compared to high-income country and other developing country. The high-income country, their growth was only 3%. Other developing country, their growth was also around 3%. But China grew at 9%. And if you want to grow at 9%, you need to upgrade your industries. You need to have a technology innovation. And so upgrading technology and industrial upgrading certainly all require investment. Investment need to be supported by saving. So I think to have a very high saving rate, it's not an issue. As long as you have a good investment opportunity, certainly you need to have high saving rate. And in fact, I talk about those certain economies in the world, they achieve 7% or more growth rate, continuing for 25 or more years. They all have high saving and high investment. And the reason why people think that China has trouble because China did not behave like high-income country. And for high-income country, as I mentioned, their technology innovation has been very slow. They do not have such a high investment opportunities. And the investment return is not that high. And as a result, certainly the consumer. But China, compared to other advanced countries, which they have so many good investment opportunities, find out to benefit from those investment opportunities. And I compare other poor performing economies, how come we should use them as a reference and to reduce our savings and to, if we reduce our savings, certainly our growth will be reduced. But for us, if we want to have a national rejuvenation, we need to have a growth. And certainly, China need to further improve in many areas, with that I agree. But for me, the most important thing to make a judgment is not to look into the problems. And when people, try to say China has problems, in general, they use the theory or experiences in the advanced country as a reference point. And if China do not behave like them, or if China do not behave according to the theory of the advanced country, they think that China has a problem. For example, industrial policy. And I'm going to start to say, well, yes, a lot of industrial policy failed, but we did not observe any developing country to catch up the advanced country without using industrial policy. That's one thing. And historically, I cannot observe any advanced country without using industrial policy to maintain their, leadership in the world. So they all did that. And certainly, many industrial policy failed. But at the same time, people only say, well, you need to rely on entrepreneurs. Actually, the failures of entrepreneurs, the probabilities of failure of entrepreneur is much higher than industrial policy. And we are taught you only need to rely on entrepreneurs. You should not rely on industrial policy. And so there's unbalance. Very often we use theory. We use the experience of the advanced country. And to consider the theory was right, what the advanced country did was right. For example, I started to advocate the need for developing country to use industrial policy. They say you should not. Then I ask, how come high-income country all support R&D? Advanced country, their technology are on the global frontier, right? If we want to have a new technology, we need to do research and development. And other sectors, they have incentive for development of new product, development of new technology, because when they break through, they can get a patent. And so they're willing to take a risk to do the development of new technology, new product. But we know risk research is a public good. And the private sector in general, they don't have incentive to do the basic research. And under that, the government will have to support basic research. But the basic research the government can support is unlimited. And the fund for the government is limited. So under that kind of situation, the government need to identify the sectors of basic research they want to support. And once the government identify those kind of sectors and put money into those kind of sectors, then once you get a breakthrough, then you unleash the potential for the private sector to do development. So in that regard, the support for basic research is the industrial policy in the advanced country. Then I start to say that. Then the argument in the academic circle is that support basic research is right. But you cannot do anything other than supporting basic research. But for the developing country, we can import technology. We don't have to support basic research before we reach the frontier, right? So we are educated in a mentality what the advanced countries are doing. That's right. And developing country, if they want to do something, they just has to do exactly what the advanced country. But what appropriate for advanced country are not appropriate for developing country. And so that's very important for us to have understanding of the nature of the problem, our understanding of the nature of the opportunity, and come up with understanding in order to catch up, to capture these opportunities.
Great. I agree with most of what you said, but I don't have time to tell you which part I may not fully agree. But let me take a few questions until 5:45, right, Professor Henry? So I see the first hand here and the second and third. So three questions here. This gentleman in the second row first. Can you give him the microphone?
William from South China. You are probably the one in the room with the best crystal. So, with the third panel around the corner, here, share with us some of your educated guess on I saw you see. Can you share some of your educated guess on what the party's plenum's directions and what are the potential policies that we might have the details, but maybe you can share with us some of the directions that you think that's right for China's next phase growth. Yeah, that's
okay. So under the guidance of the solution, we should take three questions at a time. Is it okay? So second question, there's a gentleman here, and then the second row, third row, and then there's one in the middle. Can you stand up, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the time of our panel speakers. And I have two questions. So one is about the challenges facing by China, because if we look at the statistics published by the NBS in the first 5 months of this year, the fixed asset investment from the private sector increased by only 0.1%, dragging down the fixed asset investment growth to only 4%. And also, if we look at the real estate, the property sales in the first 5 months is decreased by 28%. So this clearly point to a sluggish confidence both in the private entrepreneur to make new investment, and also the sluggish household confidence to make big ticket purchase like property. So my question about the challenge is that what kind of forceful measures should the Chinese government take in order to turn around the confidence of private sector, the private entrepreneurs and households? And my second question.
one question.
Oh, okay, sure.
So could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Eric. So just audience who is interested in how China will face the challenge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Eric. So there's a question. The third question in the middle.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Lin. Thank you, Dr. Tan and Dr. Yu. I'm Isaac Wu from Hong Kong Youth Entrepreneurship Fund. And I was very lucky that I joined Professor Lin's seminar 6 years ago in Hong Kong. So welcome back to Hong Kong and welcome back to Hong Kong U. And may I have the questions to you and to the panel is under the one country, two system in the coming 20 years. So what are the main risks and opportunities for the Hong Kong, China, one of the best free economy of the world, facing the challenges and maybe the teamworks from the biggest socialism economy, the mainland China. Thank you.
Obviously, you remember all three questions? The first one is the crystal ball.
And the first question about what will be the main doings of the coming plenaries. I think the Communist Party already announced will be further deepening on market-oriented reforms. Yeah, further deepening. And if you look, because in the product markets, it has been almost totally liberalized. But in the factory markets, there are still many government intervention or barrier and so on. So I think the reform will hit many factor markets. And also, certainly, every plenary need to bring some new ideas and to further promote the development in China. And also, the new quality productive force will be highlighted in this new plenary. That's my guess. But we can be very patient because we can see the result in about 1 month, right? And the second one about how to have the confidence of the Chinese people. Certainly, because to have continuous growth, that means you need to have a continuous adjustment. In this adjustment, you must have some sector lose, and you have some sector gained. And so we are going to have some people who are optimistic, and some people who are pessimistic. And especially when everyone said China is going to collapse, it will cause most people to be very pessimistic. And so it's very, very important. We need to have a better analysis. What are the causes of the challenges in China? That's one thing. What are the reasons for those challenges? That's one thing. And secondly, it's also very important for us to understand what are the opportunities. And further, the country is moving towards the direction to capture that opportunities. We need to have this kind of more balanced analysis in order to change people's perception. But unfortunately, international medias, they like to talk about the trouble in China. Not only international media, international research institution in general also like to look at the trouble in China. And if everyone talk about China has so many problems, well, not me, right? And how can ordinary people to have objective understanding of those kind of analysis? So not only in the past 45 years that we often heard the coming collapse of China from outside China. Even internally, many people buy that argument. But I think it's a fact. It's a fact of life. So the only way to respond to that is to do our thing right, make our economy continue to grow. And once you have grown, then people will gain more confidence. I think that is the way to do it. Yeah. And then what is the last question?
Second question is about confidence. Like, what kind of measures can the Chinese government adopt to boost confidence, right?
I think that the most important is growth. You cannot try to boost the confidence of the people, introducing some policy, maybe temporarily provide relief to the people, but at the cost of sustainable growth in the futures. And I think the best way is that growth to deal with this kind of, perception. Yeah. That's overall. But in certain kind of specific situations, like in COVID, then the government need to do some temporary relief. But other than those kind of emergencies, my personal view is that growth is the best way to enhance people's confidence. Because, my experience is that every year, people always talk about the problems. But retrospectively, people are always very happy. They see our consumption increase so much, our income increase so much, our housing become larger and larger, right? So the growth to deal with this. And as a developing country, it's so easy to find problems for two reasons. Because people always use high-income country as a reference. As long as you do not have something like high-income country, people thought it's a problem. That's one thing. And secondly, intellectual in general use the theory from the advanced country as a reference. So as long as the country do not do something according to the mainstream theory, in general, they think those kind of policies are wrong. But as I mentioned, if you follow that kind of policies, yes, academically will claim you do the right thing, but the result can be very poor for the country. So under that kind of situation, I think the policymakers, they need to be very clear in their mind. What is good for the country? According to their understanding of the realities and their understanding of the opportunity, instead of trying to please other people. And only by that, they can help, they can steal the continual growth in the country.
One last question about one country, two system. I don't know.
The biggest risk for the failure or the challenge for one country two system is the Hong Kong government failed to understand what's that supposed to mean. And reality tells us in the past many years, the Hong Kong government and the elite in Hong Kong don't understand that. Even after 2019, I think this is still the biggest challenge, and the challenge is growing actually. Because Hong Kong is no longer in the same comfort zone that they were in 40, 50 years ago. So with the Hong Kong government, especially the civil servant, the elite class doesn't understand this challenge, which today I have to say that they don't. So that will be the biggest challenge. And supplement that a little bit is that if the central government failed to recognize that the Hong Kong elite, the government, the civil servant, whoever that is, and the business sector also fail to admit that they don't quite understand that, and we keep going to the central government to ask for direction, then Hong Kong will totally screw up. So I think this is the biggest challenge for Hong Kong, especially on the economic side. I think that's all I should comment on. Oh, one more thing. Well, I want to add, somebody was talking about the failure of the property sector and how it lose confidence. I am a person who suffers extensively from the property sector, but I have to admit, this is a very successful strategy. This is a very successful policy. If you look at the 28% that you mentioned about the dropping of the property price, I think it's higher than that, okay? But when you look at that, the banking sector in the last 3-4 years has only dropped about 10 to 15% in terms of the market value. But you go back to 2008, Citibank, Morgan Stanley, look at how much how big they have dropped the price. If I don't remember wrongly, Citibank lost 85% of the market value in 2008. And banks in China, Construction Bank, ICBC, Agricultural Bank, Bank of China, they only average loss about 12 to 15% at the peak. So if that's the case, you think that's a very serious problem? Yes, it's serious. Like me, there's a lot of property in my hand. But for people that are not, of course, if some of you own some property, a flat or something, then you have a problem. Other than that, it's not that bad. Okay, so look at it in a more dialectical way in looking at that situation. I'm not saying there's no problem. There's a lot of problem. Okay, but that problem is not that serious like we heard from the media outside. Okay. Great. Thank you. So we have time for more questions. Maybe one last question. And Professor Lee said I should give a chance to a girl, a female student. So sorry for the man. And there's one here, maybe 2 more questions, right? So 2 ladies on this side. Sorry, I mean, I wish that there would be time for you to interact with us. Well, because there's no women here, and there's you bring Professor Lee's instruction to get a woman, and then maybe I can balance it later. But please.
Hello. Thanks to the opportunity. I'm Zhang Jun, legal master of Hong Kong, a master student of Hong Kong U, and I'm very curious about how do you think of China's low birth rate and the aging trend of China that will influence China's economy in the future? Thank you.
So that lady.
Linda, and I'm a student at the Department of Philosophy and major in AI ethics and society. And I think during the speech, we can see the state is very powerful in influencing China's economy. However, I don't see there are a lot of policy that would empower individuals. And I think sometimes individual agencies and individual feeling empowered is very important in terms of entrepreneurship or in terms of how one individual can exert, like can have an impact in the world. So will there be policies that could empower individuals instead of relying on the state? Because we can see people rushing to be civil servants and people just rely on, like, really believe in the authority, but they don't really see what they can really do by themselves.
So one question about the market, one question about economy.
For the issue of demography, and I was heavily influenced by those kind of pessimistic view in the past. And especially I think China may follow the first step of Japan. Before Japan entered into the Asian, in the 1990s, Japan's growth was so fast, so rapidly. But after they entered into Asian, Japan's growth rate dropped down to about 1%. And many people thought China might follow that also, and it caused many people to be very pessimistic. But recently, I look into the experience in the world. So far, there are 53 countries reaching the stage of aging. That means, people with 65 years or more, and consisted of more than 14% of the population, and those are the Asian, societies. In these 53 countries, we can divide them into two groups. One is that when they are Asians, they already with a per capita GDP of 50% of the US. So they are rich, before they became Asian. The other 26 countries, when they were Asian, their per capita GDP was less than 50% of the US. China is one of that. And in China, we call 未富生老. Before you became Asian, you were not rich. And the people thought this will make the economy facing even more challenges than most advanced countries. But if you carefully look in these two groups of the country, compared to 10 years before their aging and 10 years after their aging, the first group was a rich country when they entering into aging, their GDP growth rate dropped a little bit. But their per capita GDP growth rate basically maintained as before aging. For the second group, to my surprise, both their GDP growth rate and per capita GDP growth rate were accelerated. So object to my perception, or I think also your perception, that's the reason why you ask the questions. So just object to our common perceptions. At the beginning, I was very surprised, but after careful think, I think this should be the case. Because aging is not black swan. It's an event. You can predict that 20 years ago, you know when you're going to face the issue of aging. And we know what will be the effect of the aging. Population growth rate will drop. Labor force growth rate will drop. Government knows that. And the government will adopt policy to mitigate the negative growth rate of labor force, slowing down in the labor force growth rate. Because we know what are important for economic productions. It's not the number of the workers, should be the effective labor force. And effective labor force is a product of number of workers and quality of the workers. And the quality of worker very much depends on education. So when a country faced in the issue of aging 20 years ago, in general, government started to increase more investment in education. And so when the time aging comes, actually, their effective labor will not drop, can even increase. The case of China. Now, the average education for the working population in China between age of 16 to 60 was 10.8 years. For the retirement workers, their average education was about 8 years. But for the new cohort, their education on the average is 13.8 years. So actually, if you measure by effective labor, it increased, it did not drop. And how come their per capita GDP and the GDP growth rate accelerated? By improving education of the workforce, labor force, it enabled them much capable to adopt new technology, to go into new industries. So as a result, their per capita GDP growth rate accelerated. Their GDP growth rate also accelerated. And for the first group, which country, when they reach aging, because they have been rich for so long, their education level has been so high for so long. So it's very hard for them to further improve education. The scope is so small. And as a result, effective labor is very hard for them to further raise. And under the kind of situation, they were able to maintain per capita GDP growth rate around 2%. Does not change much. But because, the population growth dropped, and that's the reason why their GDP growth rate dropped. And I do not have time. They might have to analyze how come Japan performed so poorly, right? You can read some articles I wrote about that.
There's a second question about empowering individuals. I don't know whether you have anything to say.
Well, empowering individuals, certainly education, business opportunities, and people are rational. For any country at any time, when you have a downturn in the growth rate, in general, people started to put security over their growth opportunities. And also they're looking for a job to provide them securities. But if you have a more dynamic growth, then they will shift to capture more opportunities. And I think that's a common phenomenon, not only in China, almost in every country. I'm sure also including in Hong Kong. And so the best way to provide opportunity to the entrepreneurship certainly is maintain stability, maintain the growth in the country. And by that, it will provide more opportunities for entrepreneurial. But no matter how hard the government do, like China today is one of the largest trading country in the world, certainly China will be affected by the global economic situation. No matter how hard we do our job, and to have a cyclical situation in the Chinese GDP is unavoidable. And during the downturn, certainly people will pursue security more than development opportunity. Yeah, but at the end, the result to encourage more entrepreneurship is to have a better business environment, have a better growth opportunities, and with that, certainly more people will be attracted to be entrepreneurs.
Let me add one sentence on that, because
I don't want an aged economist to answer a young lady's liberal thinking question, okay? Because what she was asking is why everybody went into the civil service, why everybody listened to the government. Now, please, like I said, there's always so much misunderstanding. I lived there since 1979, okay? So I was not born in mainland, but I went into there. You are seeing a lot of the things from media, like mine, okay? But the biggest problem is that China is always having a defensive communication. So people keep talking about why the government is like that, why the government, and then they're defending. Oh, we just like what Justin was saying that we need them to give them security, jobs, incomes, homes, and all that. There's a huge society in China, a very liberal, so liberal that you don't believe it. Okay, so there's a huge segment. I'm not asking you to promote literary book, 小红书, okay? But if you go there, go to Douyin, okay, I'm sure you will find a very liberal segment in the society. And you will see that much more. But people outside don't really understand it as much. So please, there's a parallel society there and they're converging pretty well. So I wish you will be able to have an open mind in that aspect.
And then I agree with Dr. Yu. One of the most liberal places in Beijing is actually Peking University. For those of you who want to learn from Professor Lin, there's actually a previous debate between Professor Lin and Zhang Weiying on YouTube 10 years ago about industrial policy. Too bad that time is out, it's already over 6. I'm not going to conclude, but you asked Professor Lee, who already forced me to give up the microphone, and he's going to give a closing remark.
Okay, yeah. 2 hours passed so quickly. Please stay. First, I want to thank the audience for your excellent questions, but also that I apologize. We will, because of time concern, not ask. But I hope in the future that we will better prepare. I also want to thank the 2 discussants and Professor Yu. You actually represent the property developers, but you are also critical, and you also have your own interests. That's admirable, but also you have a media, but you also have some reservations about the media view. This is really the time that we need to go beyond our personal, even professional interests and look at to analyze a country, a society, and the world. So you certainly show, exemplified that. My colleague, he went on and really brilliantly moderated this panel, but also provided different views, more critical views, and balance some of the discussion here.
Not that critical.
But most importantly, it's for our distinguished speaker. I will watch the video when it's out in a few days, because you have a lot of very important messages that I need to absorb. But what I like or what I like most are 3 things related with your optimistic view. I believe that it's much easier to be pessimist than optimist. This is number 1. Because if you're pessimist, you're wrong. People will say, who will you? Oh, that did not happen. But if you're optimist, you're wrong. Then you can imagine people will blame you with the stock market or property market or whatever. And the second thing is I admire you, actually, as Professor Yu said, I fully agree. Look at the past 30-some years, maybe 40 years. You are largely right. And maybe someone will say you're always right. But the last one I want to say, I know that the time, and then I will just wait with a quote with Winston Churchill when he said, what's the difference between pessimist and optimist? He said, pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. Optimist, the opportunity in every difficulty. He represented the optimistic views, and unfortunately, China and the last in the past 40 years on the optimistic side. With that, I want the audience to join me again. Thank you for our 3 participants, especially Professor Lin. That's it. We have a small souvenir for you. Our center is established just 6 months ago, but your center, your think tank, is really our model. This is the 6 months report.